Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, Studer Vista 1 class, part 2, presented by Mihály András and Dávid Rikk. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. So just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenters and they'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar is being recorded and the link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com. We're adding new sessions daily and have over 20 sessions scheduled for July and August, so watch for those on the calendar. And now I'd like to introduce you to Mihály András and Dávid Rikk, the presenter for today's webinar. Mihály is a Budapest-based live sound engineer who has worked at major venues, including Aquarium Club, A38, and Budapest Park. He has worked with a range of international and Hungarian artists such as Eagles of Death Metal, Wolfmother, Glass Animals, Elephant, Ivan and the Parasol, and Zabo Balas Bandaya. David has been head of sound at Aquarium Club, Hungary's biggest indoor venue, for the past 6 years. He has also worked on every major Hungarian festival, including Szeged, Volt, Balaton Sound, and Ozaro, in addition to touring with international acts like Sepultura and Therion. And now I'll pass it over to you, David.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the second session of Vista 1 we're doing with András. Today he's behind the cameras and I will be doing the presentation stuff. On the menu today we'll have bussing and mixing strategies for live. And then the second part will be about snapshots and basic things about using snapshots on the console and building up your snapshots for a show. So let's dig in. So first of all, shortly, really basics about busing and groups. So as you should know, bus is basically a way from take your input source from A to B. This is common between a group bus and the master bus. The difference is like when you have your input channels routed directly to a master bus, that's one layer of processing and control over your channels. Now, there's a way that you can add group buses, meaning you're going through a separate bus to your master. And that will be, in this case, that will be a case where you have one extra layer of control by means of level and dynamics or EQ processing. And in groups, you can handle multiple channels simultaneously. For example, create a drum group with all of your drum channels there, or couple up your bass mic and bass line to keep the relation of those two channels by using on your bus fader for leveling your bass guitar and not messing around with the faders you already set up to have the ratio you desired for your result. Or you can have your background vocalist coupled up to have an overall control for them. So this is these are the topics we're going to dig in a little bit deeper than I described now. So, as Andrew told you on the session Tuesday, on this console, if we move to fader part first, how you can assign channels to different buses is by pressing the desired channels bus assign button, and then on the touchscreen part of Vistonic display, you can easily assign or deassign your channels from your groups or your master bus. On this console, if you want to have multiple layers of groups, because that will be the most part of my session about groups, is if you're working with multiple layers of groups, and I mean by that you can route, or we will route a group to another group to another group, etc. You have to do this in the config, because by default the desk is not enabled to have multiple layers of groups, but there's a possibility to do it in the config file. As far as I know, the provided config files with Vista 1 are not enabled, but as Andrew told you, you can ask Studer for a fee to do your session, your configuration as you want to by contacting them. Okay, back to busing. So as I told you before, the basic busing strategy from back in the days was until now as well, that you have your inputs buzz to your master channel and you have control over your whole mix with your master bus, and then you have control over your channels by the channels themselves. But if you add, for example, one extra group, then you can have that extra layer of processing and control over the inputs you're assigning into them. Also, you can go parallelly by sending your channels into the group, from the group to the master, and then send the channels directly to the master as well. This is called parallel busing. We will dig in that as well, just so we're clear with the topics we're having there. Okay, if we roll over to control bay area, you can see that right now, also as Andrew mentioned to you, there's a possibility to have a full dynamic section on your groups with a limiter, a compressor, an expander, and a gate. And also there's a possibility to have a double EQ section, which means you have on the left side your parametric EQ, and on the right side your graphic EQ, which you can also send it to your faders. But this is part of the config as well. And one other important and interesting thing about this console, if I don't switch layers all the time, is that you have the possibility to insert external hardware, which is pretty common between desks. But what makes this desk particular in between those others, in my opinion, is that your insert hardware option is not just the two-way on-off mode, but instead you have the possibility to change the drive-at ratio between those. So when you activate your insert, for example, on a group, if you're using, for example, an external hardware compressor, but you don't want to use more groups than one, or you just don't have enough, or the possibility some way to send them parallelly, then you can just easily move the encoder, and then you're moving from 0 to 100% of wet. So this way you can have parallel processing without adding extra buses. Okay, so first of all, I will tell you about the session I built up for, and the show file I built up for this session. And then we'll dig in first with drums, because that's the place where most of the extra layer is happening. So I built up a show that I use on a regular basis if I have the possibility to work with a desk with multiple group layers enabled. So I have my drums here with several acoustic and electric sources by means kick in, kick out, a snare top, snare bottom, second snare, 3 toms, a trigger or SPD kick, an SPD snare, and then I have my cymbals, which contains a hi-hat, a ride, and 2 overhead channels. Then I have 2 channels of bass, a DI and a microphone, 3 channels of guitars. Then on my second layer, I have a section of percussion. Then I have a trio of brass instruments, a trumpet, a trombone, and a saxophone. Then I have a couple of keyboards here, a group of backing vocalists, and then a group of like 2 lead singer. And then on my third layer, I have my FX return. So these are my inputs, and then we're gonna get through the drum processing I usually do if I have the option. I mean, if the desk is capable of doing what I will show you. So there are several ways to add punch, depth, and control for your overall drum sound. and I will show you a couple of these, what I use time to time when I can. So first of all, I will actually tell you the process, and then I will activate the output of the console, and then you can hear what's happening actually. So first, we start with my kick and snare channels, where I use a pretty basic old school technique I saw from many engineers in studio and in live as well. And this method is not using EQs singly, one by one. So I'm not doing EQ, gate, compression on my kick in, my kick out, my SPD kick, and I'm not doing it with snare top, snare bottom, snare SPD, but instead of that, what I do is after gaining up, for example, in the case of kick, after I gain up my channels, I found the ratio of these three channels that are the closest to the final result I want to hear. And then I route them to a mono kick group. And if you check it on my control group, control bay, you see I have my kick channel. And basically this will be the kick channel I'm using to make my kick channel in my drum mix, like to level and process it. So this way, those three channels I already set up properly, and those are in the ratio I want them to be. They won't change, because whenever I want to do anything with my kick drum, I do it on this single bus. And that means gating and EQing as well. So I don't do it 3 times. There's no unnecessary EQ moves. No, like, you know, if you cut out or push like at least 3 bands on the kick, you don't have to do it 3 times. 3 times the phase problems, you do it only once, and you will hear that the result is fairly good. So this is the same method with my snare. Since there are more inputs, I combine them into one single mono group. I go over to my control bay area and I do the same processing that I did with the kick on this single channel, so I keep the ratio. So this way I don't have to do everything multiple times, and I skip a lot of unnecessary moves. Then my next step is building up my partial drum groups. This is 3 drum groups, sorry. First is called a shell dynamic group. The second is the shell crush group, and the third is my cymbals group. So let's talk about my shell groups. In my shell groups, I have assigned my kick group, which is basically my kick channel, my snare group, which is basically my snare channel, and the rest of the kit shells, which are not multiple, but single sources, like the single microphone of my FX snare, the single microphone of my toms. Then and I applied these channels to the kick, to the shell crush group as well. So why I do this? I do this to have the most detailed, dynamic, yet still punchy sound I can get out of the kit. And how I do it is with my shell dynamic group, I use just some slow attack, fast release, and a low amount, like tops 3:1 ratio, just to have a control over my shells. But then I move on to the shell crush group, where I used fairly fast attack, fairly fast release, a high amount of ratio, something like a 1176 style, and I really smash the drums. And this way, when I blend my crushed group with the dynamic, I earn a lot of punch and volume with this heavily overcompressed drums. And then my cymbals are just kept away from the shells, so I can use some slower attack, some mildly slower release, and also play around with a sidechain EQ filter on it, so the compressor doesn't start to work that early, for example, to the snare and the kick drum, so I managed to avoid getting that pumping effect of the kick and the snare driving the cymbal compression. Then, with these 3 channels, I go into the single drum group, and that's where my drum's at. So from that on, if I want to move my overall drum level, I will use my overall drum bus. So what I will do now is I put on my headphones, I send you the signal, and I mute out. Yeah, you have to be aware with multiple layers, like really, really aware with multiple layers of groups, because if you by mistake mute something somewhere on your layers, it will be quite a time to find where you messed it up. So I try to not mess it up right now. Okay, snare. Yeah, my FX. And I switch off the processing. Okay. So now I have my kick group, but only my dynamic section. Then let's roll with the snares. I just muted it for a moment so I can talk to you about the expander of this desk. So if you want to get rid of just really, background bleed, but you want to keep the subtle things like the ghost notes on a snare, this expander is just magical. So what I did, I just dialed it in like 3 seconds, and as you can hear, I will disengage it and engage it again. A little less maybe. So you have your ghost notes pretty nice there. Okay, so now we're going to move on with the partial groups. So this is my dynamic group. And probably you'll hear it as I engage the compressor. It just gets a little bit controlled. But then, when I engage my crush channel, you'll hear it's pretty heavily compressed. Transients totally destroyed just a heavy mass of hot lava or something. So now I will unmute the dynamic channel and the crushed, and then I will slowly blend it in. And you will hear as the drums get punchier and thicker. So you don't want to overuse it. And now I add my cymbal channels. and then I engage my effects channels, and I will talk with the VCA FX return trick a little later. Okay, so that's with the multiple layers of drums. And well, as you can see with the drums, I use direct busing and parallel busing as well, since I have all my channels routed in several buses parallelly before hitting my main drum bus. And this is how I gain punch, volume, thickness, and preserve the dynamics, but also have that heavy mass of energy to drive your mix by drum side. And also, I think it's really important to separate the cymbals in this case, to have it more detailed and to don't have your drum shells drive your cymbal compressors. Also, there's a nice trick I like to use, which is definitely has nothing to do with busing, but I will tell you about because I was pretty surprised when I learned that external, like hardware gates can do it, like built in 80s or even before, is triggering your gate. So there might be cases when you have a really, really super loud drummer or just too many cymbals around his too many toms, and you want to separate your tom gates, for example, from the rest of the shell's bleed. So you don't want your second tom to open whenever he hits super heavily the snare, or there's just a huge china right next to his floor tom, and whenever he hits it, well, you can separate it by hiring your threshold, but then you will miss the subtle parts of his drumming, for example, when he's doing ghost notes. So for this, what you can do is to have a trigger on your drum shell and send it to the key input of your gate. If you want to do it properly, you measure the time difference between the microphone and the trigger, like how fast the signal comes in from one to the other. You set up your attack time to that, and then from that point, whenever your drummer hits that single drum shell, the gate won't be driven by the microphone signal, but instead you will have the trigger signal drive the gate, which is fairly separated from the acoustic bleed of the rest of the drum kit. As far as I know, but Paul will correct me out if I'm not right, but as far as I know, with this desk, you cannot have a key input, like an external key input for your gate, but Paul will correct it if I'm not right. So if that's the case, you can still use hardware gates inserted through your channel or bus insert sends and returns. Okay, we're moving towards the rest of the band. So there are cases when you have several sources with the same instrument or same instrument type, and you want to use them as one group or one fader. But in the meantime, you might want to even out the occurring level differences between. So this is what groups are basically really good for, as I told you before. But it's really important to mention that in contrary of what I showed you with, for example, my kick and snare channels, in this case I won't treat the channels as one single source, because sonically, for example, if I want to control or process my whole brass trio or my whole percussion section together, the sources differ much more sonically than, like, I have my kick in, my kick out, and my SPD kick. They are fairly similar. There are slight differences, but mostly they're similar. But if I have a brass trio, for example, I want to control their overall level with a compressor. The EQing I'm doing on the channels, because a saxophone definitely differs from a trumpet or a posaune EQ-wise or input-wise, or the players are different persons, so your output level might differ as well. And this is not the case with your kick channel with 3 input sources. So that is really important to mention. And in this case, if we roll over to the control bass section, what I have set up is I have my bass group, it's a mono bass group, a stereo guitar group, a stereo percussion group, a stereo brass group, and a backing vocal group. I have 2 other groups here, but we'll get to that later. So with these groups, what I do, as I told you, I just want to have some overall control to level out, for example, the differences between the line and the microphone on the bass, or the different outputs of the different brass instruments, or the singer's output volume is not equal in the backing vocal group. So because I want only to have some control over it, and I don't want to use the compressor as an effect to be audible, I use slow attacks to keep my transients and fast releases to still get to the next audible signal they're going to put out. And happily, you don't have to apply pan follow, as in the case of auxes. So you don't have to mess around in your default setup to your group be following your channel panoramas. So this is how I get control over the multiple instruments or instrument groups, a part of the drum. And then I have my last 2 groups here, which is a full group of the band, which means everything apart the lead singers. So my band groups here, and I have a lead group with my 2 lead singers assigned to it. And also my FX returns, but we'll get to that later. So this is an easy way to get control over your band to lead vocal ratio. You don't have to dig into the desk and find your channels. They're just here at your hand. And if you want to push just a little on the vocals or just reduce the group, you have these 2 feeders. You still have your master fader. So you have that option for boosting or reducing their whole show level. But if you want to change this ratio, this is a good way to do it. And also, a really handy tool could be sidechain compression, or if you're using an external, for example, multiband compressor, could be a useful way to apply it on your band group and be the lead vocalist group the sidechain signal to that compressor. So this way, when your lead singer is singing, you can reduce either, in case of multiband compression or dynamic EQ, one certain range of frequencies, or in case of a single all-band compressor, the whole band's level. You don't have to do it drastically for sure. So if you need that little extra speech or vocal clarity, then you can set up a sidechain compressor on your band group, triggered by your lead vocalist group, and whenever he or she will sing, then you can set the threshold that your band will be reduced by just like a tiny 1 or 1.5 dB, and that will give you just that little extra that you need. And the last step is master bus compression. And this is a tool, like all of these tools are tools that you don't have to use, but these are good ways to get closer to an album-like impact with your mix. Because since the loudness war started in the recording industry, and since people's ear are more onto that over-compressed or multiple layered or compressed or limited by multiple layers, like that heavy mass of sound, then the people are fairly expecting to hear the same or something similar on a live show. And because of that, depending on the genre you're doing, for sure, because on a jazz show, the people won't need to have like a super loud, super heavy mass of energy hitting them all the time. They want to hear the subtle dynamic changes, the musicians creating themselves by how they react to each other or how they use their instruments. But in modern genres like a pop production or a metal show, people will expect to have a similar sound that they have on the records. And one tool for this is to apply compression or even limiting on your master bus. You don't have to go to extremities, but applying 1 or 2 layers of compression to your master bus can drive you a little closer with these tools as well, like together to have that sound. So we're gonna move to VCAs because I have 2 things I want to show you with my VCAs. One of them actually is just one thing, it's just detailed. So my VCAs are like this. I have a drum pre and a drum post VCA, and we're gonna stop here because basically that is what I want to talk about. My drum pre VCA is made of my input channels, and I mean my kick group, my snare group, and the rest of the channels, my toms, my second snare, and my cymbals. And then I have my drum post VCA, which is basically driving my overall drum group. And what I do with this is if I want to apply less compression to my partial drum groups, I move around my drum pre-fader. And I will show you this. And I will try to compensate my overall level so you can hear that there's less compression or more. So this is how I control it's not necessary, but if there's parts when you want to have a little control over how much compression do you apply to your groups, this is a good way to do it. And the last technique I will talk about for mix buses is your FX returns. It's just a plain easy thing that instead of sending your FX returns directly to your master bus, which you control, for example, either with your faders or either with the VCA you assign to your FX, you assign these FX returns to the groups where the instruments you're sending to them are applied to as well. And by this I mean that I have, for example, a drum room and a drum plate here, and instead of sending them to my master channel, I'll send them to my overall drum group. And if I check it with these contribute reduce modes, you'll see that I have my 2 effects returns a part of my partial drum groups. And this is useful for only one reason. If you have your effect returns sent to your master bus directly, when you are reducing your overall drum group, the signal that you send from your input channel to the FX engine, which is getting back to your FX return, will keep the same. So even though I'm reducing my overall drum group channel, my FX return won't change. So for that, I would have to use my drum overall VCA and my FX VCA at the same time. But in this case, and that might cause that the ratio between your FX and your dry signals will change in a way that you don't want to change. So for this, you can assign your FX return to your drum group. And now, when you are reducing your overall drum group, you keep the ratio between the FX and your dry channels, and you only have to reach for one single fader, which makes you easier to focus more on the mixing instead of looking for faders on your desk. And actually, you can just move around without, switching between layers, or build up your layers in a way that you use spaces from something else you'd rather have on your control bay or fader bay. And for mix bus and grouping, that's all. And I just drink a bit. And we move on to snapshots. So for the snapshots, I will move my camera so you can see the GC. Yep, that's it. Okay, so what is a snapshot? A snapshot, basically, it's a lot like a show file or a title. You call it on this the Studer systems. The main thing, so with the show file and with the snapshot, you save the actual state of the desk. It is like you would make a photo of it. How is it right now? But in the case of snapshots, you have the possibility to filter out what you want to save or recall and what you want to isolate from it. So this way you can automate certain parts of your show from song to song, snapshot to snapshot, and leave certain parts as they are. So in the case of this console, you can recall or isolate any parameter, patch, gain, EQ, dynamics, bus assigning, even parts of them, for example, only the gain of the parametric EQ is low section. So if you check on my fader bay, nope, I messed it up, the control bay part, sorry. I will show you how you make snapshots. So one way, first you reach the snapshot window on the GC by either getting on the view screen to snapshot, or on the console general, like the graphic controller part, there's the snapshot button with which you can recall the snapshot part. So how you make a snapshot or how you recall a snapshot is either you just press make on the snapshot window and you see there's the snapshot appeared, my number one snapshot. Or the other way is to go to the console and use the make snapshot button, which will make you a snapshot, or you have 4 buttons on the console to assign certain snapshots, and then you can hold your make button and press the desired snapshot 1, 2, 3, or 4, and as you can see, snap 1 key appeared on the screen. And then how you recall it is either you hold recall, and then you push your snapshot 1 button, and it will recall that snapshot. Or the other way, you just select with your mouse on the screen the snapshot one you want to recall, you press recall. there you go. You have your snapshots there. So right now, I'm just going to delete these fast, so I won't mess up my session. And then we're on to isolating, because right now when I made my snapshot, I saved the whole console as it is. Whatever I will change and then update on my snapshot will be recalled when I recall that snapshot. But what if I want to isolate certain parts? So I don't want my 3 guitar channels to be recalled, whatever I save onto them. I want them to be isolated, so whatever I do with them, it will keep the same on the rest of the snapshots. So this is called isolation. And for isolation, for you to have isolation on the console, you have to turn it on. So you have to go to the GC, and there is a filter on-off button. And when you press it, that's when you can make isolation. Or if you go to your desk's graphic controller part, there's this filter off button, which is light up if it's cancelled out. By means, if it's red, you cannot isolate anything. If it's not lighting up, then you can use your isolation. So one way to isolate your channel is by pressing this ISO button. And as you can see, it turned into a yellowish color. And if you go through your global view, you will see that yellow marks, yellow icons appeared all through the whole channel strip, meaning that everything is isolated. So right now, whatever I do, it will apply to the rest of my snapshots. What if I want to isolate just certain parts of the desk? Well, in that case, you hold your ISO button, and on your channel strip, or on your Vistanic view, you just select, touch what you want to isolate from your snapshots. And as you can see, it will turn yellow, meaning that you isolated them. And if you unpress, you will see that the ISO button is lighting up, but just halfway through. And this is how the console shows you that this channel is isolated, but not all the way through. Now I will just turn it off. The second mode to use isolation and have all or certain parts is to go to GC, and there's this ISO edit button at the snapshot window. And when you press it, you enter to isolation mode of the console. Now in this case, by using your faders, your buttons, your encoders, your knobs on the Vistanic screen, you won't be changing parameters. You will just apply isolation to them. So either when you're in ISO edit mode, either you do the same process as if you were holding the ISO button, but right now you can do it all around the console. Or you move to GC and you select the filters here. Audio is for audio processing, input bus assign is where your channel is assigned that. You can filter out your general patch, you can filter out whole buses, or you can mask or unmask everything. So this is the filter edit mode of the console. Now I escaped from it. So at the time of recalling the snapshot, there might be a filter active, leaving some console settings unchanged upon recall of any snapshot. And each console parameter can therefore be in one of the following states, which you will see on the Vistanic view and your snapshot ISO edit window as well. It can be either isolated, so it won't be affected by snapshot recalls and stores and updates. It can be in read mode, meaning if you change something and you update that on the snapshot, it will be recalled upon a snapshot recall. And there's a third mode called trim. This means offsets applied to snapshot recalls. any changes since the last snapshot recall will be applied in a relative way to the upcoming snapshot. So you have a group of guitars. You want them to be pushed a little bit more, but in all your snapshots you engage trim mode, and it will relatively apply that change to all of the snapshots. But you have to go to GC, and in the GC options window, you click automation, and you have to click enable trim mode to enable it. So in this case, when I press ISO and I start to hit my buttons, after the yellow isolate mode, it won't go to non-isolate mode. Instead, you have the red trim logo there. So you know it's in trim mode right now. Okay, we'll unenable it, and then we move forward to the partial snapshots, which are, they have to be enabled at the same place. So you go to snapshots, options, automation, and then you go to tick enable partial snapshots. So what if you want to make snapshot, but you don't want to apply it to the whole console? So this is where partial snapshots come handy. So first of all, and this is the easiest way, if you want to create a snapshot, is having the new snapshots include gang option on the GC. So first, I do a no mask snapshot, and well, no mask, if you select new snapshots include no mask, that means that whatever gang or anything is active on the desk, it will still make a whole snapshot from the whole desk, leaving the isolated parts isolated, but doing the snapshot of the unisolated channels. So we will just do a full snapshot on the desk. So I have snapshot number 1 right there. But then I want to change only my guitars, and I want the snapshot to apply to only my guitars. So first of all, I go to new snapshots include. I'm going to select gang, and then I actually move to my fader bay, and I make a gang of my guitar channels, which are, sorry, I'm in group mode. Yep. So I made a gang from my guitar channels, and right now what I will do is I will reduce these faders here, but since I have my new snapshots include gang selected, when I make my new gang, my new snapshot, sorry, I should have only these channels changed, which I didn't change, so I redo it, sorry. So I have my snapshot here like this, and then I move these channels and these channels as well. And then I make my new channel with including the gang. So when I recall my first snapshot, I should have my faders move back to 0. Bam, that's happened. But then when I go back to snapshot 2, even though I changed the levels of these 2 faders, since they're not parts of the group I created, they shouldn't be moving back to their position before, only the guitars which are part of the gang. And this is what actually happened. So this way you can snapshot parts of the desk. And I just showed you with the faders because it's the most visible thing via this streaming. But it can apply to any parameters just with the isolation on the desk. Second thing is what I already told you about, is if you select the new snapshots include no mask. This means that whatever gang is active, it won't matter. Whatever you're not isolated, it will be saved if you update the snapshot and then recalled when recalling. And the third option here is an active snapshot filter option. And this means that it will actually create a partial snapshot out of the settings currently not masked out by a snapshot filter. So whatever is not masked out, it will be saved by the snapshot, and then this way it could be recalled. And then last station is just some plain examples of drinking soda and how to start building up your snapshot. Okay, so how I start. Using snapshots can be a really useful tool if you know the band enough. If you're touring with your own console, you have your rehearsal sessions, you already have 5 to 10 or whatever shows, you learned how the band is acting on the stage. When they're on stage, off stage, instruments that might be played in single songs or a couple of songs. So basically, when you know your production, you should start to build up your snapshots. And how you should start it, or how I start it whenever I use snapshots, is first I only use mute automation, FX send automation, and FX parameter automation. I'd like to keep my EQs and my dynamics and my VCAs, my output faders isolated. So whatever change on my kick channel, for example, it will apply to all of my snapshots, so I don't have to copy it again, although it's not too big of a deal. But still, if you correct out something because you use a different microphone today, because your microphone just died and the local guy couldn't give you the same microphone, you change it and then it will apply to all of your channels. But muting and FX parameters to different songs, or FX sends to different songs, how much reverb you want to apply for your drums can alter. And so how you do it, I just show you a quick example. So right now my filter is active, so I select all my drum channels, I press ISO on them, so right now everything is isolated, and then I unisolate. I want to save, so, or recall. It's really important to say it recall, but actually it's not storing a snapshot, you're recalling parameters you updated on your snapshot. So I just pressed mute, so this way my mute is not isolated. And I go to my stereo aux sends, which drives my FX. I select their sends. Yeah, sorry, it's not doing it. Yeah, because I have to hold ISO, right? So now my FX sends are recall enabled in my snapshots, and then I go to my FX, select my effect, hold ISO on that channel, and it's unisolated, so actually I will isolate those, and I unisolate only the parameters I want to change on the FX return, which is basically just the FX channels FX parameters. Yep. Okay, I'll stop with these two. So this way, now you have a basic automation set up to your drum channels. You just have to repeat it for the rest of the channels, and then you'll have a basic snapshot system that you can use all through your show. And then when you got more into the details of the snapshots or of the show, then you can apply fader automation, EQ automation, whatever you want to. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to build snapshots and select what you want to isolate. Since you have this ISO button option, since you can link your channels by link selecting or multi-selecting or linking them all. And I think that's it for today. Thank you for checking out us on Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed it.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Paul to see if there's any questions that were answered during the session that he wanted to read out to everyone.
Okay.
Paul, can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Sorry, I was just, my video didn't start, so.
Oh, here, let me
Oh, there we go.
see if that worked.
Not that anybody wants to look at me, but hey. First of all, thank you guys. Really appreciate everything you've done. Today and Tuesday were great. In terms of questions today, there isn't really any. There was a question about a Zoom issue, but nothing to do with the consoles. There's a couple of points that I do want to bring up. I believe it is possible to use an external key for the gate or any of the dynamics. It has to be set up though in the configuration to accept sidechain.
Yeah, I think that's where we messed it up, because we didn't told to have that option ticked. So yeah, good to know.
There was a point that got missed on Tuesday. I was asked, or we were asked in the questions about Dolby encoding. There isn't a Dolby encoder decoder within the, sorry, no, it was encoder. There is not a Dolby encoder within the console, but there is the ability to insert on the monitoring stage if you want to have an encoder decoder for checking what it sounds like from a mix that you're creating. So that's possible from that perspective, but we don't actually have it built into the console. And one minor correction that Mihály mentioned about the compiler and creating configurations. The Vista 1 is actually unique in the compiler side of things. It uses a different version of the Visual DSP, and so you can only use the one that is specific for the Vista 1. The license is quite expensive, which is why we didn't include it in the original cost of the Vista, in the Vista 1. We do have the ability, though, from the Studer engineering side of things, to create configurations. So if one of the 5 or 6 of the predefined configurations don't work for a client, it is possible to reach out to either one of the US tech team or one of the EMEA tech team and get their assistance to modify and build a specific configuration for the Vista 1. I think that's it. I don't have anything else that I need to add. There's no other questions that have come in.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much to Mihály and to David for putting on both of these presentations. If you missed the presentation that took place 2 days ago, that was recorded, and we will have that posted. Actually, both of them will be posted by Monday. So if you want to check those out. Also, all of our other sessions in our learning sessions have been recorded and are out on the playlist. And then if you're interested in attending future sessions, you can go to pro.harman.com and see the full calendar. So thank you everyone for your participation. We really appreciate you showing up, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a nice
Bye.
day.